1899, the caliber of compromise was not born on the battlefield. It was forged in the stale air of diplomatic chambers. The foundational anti-tank weapon of the U.S. Army, the 37mm gun, owed its entire existence to the shadows cast by the Hague Convention. The treaty decreed that explosive projectiles had to weigh more than 0.88 pounds to be considered legally lethal. Anything smaller was deemed a cruel, fragmenting horror. The 37mm was the narrowest gateway through which a nation could pass a powerful high-explosive shell. The U.S. Ordnance Department seized upon this loophole, designed the M3 gun to deliver a 2-pound projectile, just enough to satisfy the treaty while maintaining maximum portability. But it was not law, but blood, that accelerated its development. Reports streaming back from the Spanish Civil War in 1937 confirmed a chilling reality. German 37mm anti-tank guns were proving devastatingly effective against the light armor fielded by the Soviets. The United States had nothing comparable. The M3 gun and its M4 carriage were instantly rushed into existence. This marked the Army's very first dedicated towed anti-tank weapon. It was designed for speed and simplicity, a flat trajectory field gun where a single operator could manage the elevation, traverse, and sight. The core challenge lay in the projectile's internal ballistics. To achieve the necessary 2,600 feet per second muzzle velocity, the propellant charge had to burn rapidly. This generated pressure surges peaking at 36,000 psi inside the gun tube. Early trials used older black powder, and the results were a tactical disaster. The gun crew, exposed behind the shield, watched in horror. Acrid, sulphurous smoke billowed out, followed by a brilliant, blinding flash. That flash revealed their position to every enemy observer within a mile, and worse, the black powder left dangerous hot residue inside the chamber, posing a risk of self-ignition. Engineers at the Ordnance Department worked feverishly to refine the nitrocellulose mixture. They created FNH propellant, flashless, non-hydroscopic. This wasn't just about reducing smoke, it was chemistry fighting visibility. Additives like diphenylamine stabilized the mixture, preventing the dangerous self-heating that could lead to autoignition. Dibutyl phthalate acted as a cooling agent. The goal was precise: cool the escaping propellant gases below their kindling point before they left the muzzle. When the gun fired, the characteristic white plume of smoke was replaced by a barely perceptible grey puff. This denied the enemy the visual confirmation needed for counter-battery fire. The crew could load the brass cartridge case noted for its compliance and clean extraction and fire again. They knew their position was marginally safer, the brass ejecting smoothly, unlike the problematic steel cases used by others. The next problem was movement. A towed gun was inherently vulnerable on a rapidly changing battlefield. The urgency of the arms race demanded a self-propelled solution. In 1941, Chrysler proposed the T-21, later designated the M6 gun motor carriage. This was a pragmatic, almost desperate attempt to bridge the anti-tank deficiency. At the dusty testing grounds, the T-21 looked like a piece of farm equipment jury-rigged for war. It was nothing more than an M3 gun bolted onto the chassis of a standard WC-52 weapons carrier. The driver sat crammed next to the Ford six-cylinder engine, completely exposed to the elements. There was no windshield. The crew wore heavy canvas clothing against the wind and dust. The gunner, kneeling beside the mount, squinted through the gun sight, aligning the vehicle roughly toward the target. The system was rudimentary. One gunner loaded the 2-pound projectile while the other aimed, the driver making minute adjustments to the vehicle's position. Then came the order, fire. The crack was sharp and violent. The sound pressure wave hit the crew even before the projectile, stabilized by the 12-groove rifling, tore away at 2,600 feet per second. The force of the recoil, absorbed by the hydro spring system, still made the entire 4,520-pound vehicle shudder. The driver felt the tires bite into the earth as the chassis rocked violently. It was fast, mobile, and low profile, but it offered the 3-man crew nothing but a shield for the gun itself. They were sitting ducks. This fact was underscored by the failure of earlier, more unstable prototypes like the Bantam T8, which was so top-heavy that its tires lifted clean off the ground during firing. That prototype threatened to overturn the entire rig. The Ordnance Department knew the M6 GMC was a compromise, a stopgap, classified as limited standard in 1943, yet its immediate availability using existing parts made it absolutely essential. By the time the United States entered the war, the 37mm gun was the standard. It was found towed as the M3, mounted on the M6 GMC, or installed in the turret of the new M3 Stuart light tank. It represented the culmination of interwar thinking, a weapon built on a foundation of international treaties, propelled by cutting-edge chemistry and designed for portability and speed. It was ready to face the world's burgeoning armies, a small-caliber workhorse prepared for a massive conflict. No one yet knew that the armor plates it was designed to defeat were already evolving far beyond its maximum penetration capabilities. The arms race had just begun. The 37mm was already running behind. The M3 gun, the new American standard, did not sail into war on the decks of battleships. It was carried in the bellies of transports, often bolted into the two-man turrets of the M3 Stuart light tank. In the suffocating heat of the Philippines in late 1941, the 37mm found its initial proving ground. The Stuart, which British crews would later affectionately call the Honey, was a high-profile machine. Its engine block forced the chassis up, making it an easy target. But against the early Japanese armor lightly constructed and designed for infantry support rather than tank-on-tank duels, the 37mm was a revelation. The American crews learned quickly how to maximize the gun's limited power. They relied heavily on the armor-piercing capped M51 projectile. The cap, made of high-carbon chrome steel, was designed not just to punch through the surface, it was engineered to attenuate the shock of impact, preventing the projectile body from fracturing on contact with the steel plate. It was a precise, violent ballet of physics, delivering its 2.4 inches of penetration at 30 degrees of obliquity. When the gunner, sweating profusely inside the cramped turret, lined up a Japanese Type 95 Hago, the impact was often immediate and catastrophic. The 37mm round, screaming out at 2,800 feet per second, might not always pierce the thickest frontal plate, but it rarely failed against the sides or rear. More critically, the 37mm proved devastating against the enemy's prepared fortifications. The M3 Stuart, alongside Marine Corps M2A4 tanks, rolled up to bunkers, firing high-explosive rounds to suppress the machine gun apertures. If the HE failed, the crew switched to canister shot. This was a massive shotgun blast of steel balls which shredded any infantry attempting to flank the tank. The 37mm was not just an anti-tank weapon. It was quickly becoming the infantry's best friend in the dense, unforgiving jungle. But it was in the crucible of Guadalcanal where the gun's adaptability truly shone. The Marines, fighting for survival and starved for heavy weapons, realized the 37mm was everywhere. It was on their Stuarts, on their new LVTD A1 amphibious tractors, and even on the wrecks littering the perimeter. In the summer of 1942, the relentless Japanese attempts to land reinforcements via barges became a critical threat. The available naval guns were too large, the machine guns too weak. A few resourceful marine mechanics and Navy personnel, working under the cover of dense jungle canopy near a makeshift airstrip, began salvaging the most lethal components they could find. They ripped the M4 automatic cannons from the noses of crashed P-39 Airacobra fighter planes. The M4 was a beastly weapon, solenoid-fired and designed to pump out belted ammunition at a high cyclic rate. The Marines jury-rigged these 700-pound aircraft guns onto crude custom-made mounts. They were welded directly to the foredecks of the PT boats. Aboard PT-109, the air was thick with the smell of salt spray, diesel, and freshly cut steel. Chief Petty Officer Johnson wiped a trickle of sweat from his chin. The sparks from the final weld briefly illuminated the faces of the crew gathered around the pedestal. They had taken a gun meant to engage enemy fighters at 20,000 feet and hammered it onto a plywood deck. They'd powered the solenoid firing mechanism with a scavenged battery. "Ready on the belt," Johnson muttered, adjusting the new hand grip. This was a rough, field-expedient piece of steel tubing, replacing the precise aircraft controls. The target was a line of dark silhouettes cutting through the moonless night. Landing barges carrying troops and supplies. The PT boat captain gave the order. Johnson squeezed the grip. The M4 automatic cannon did not roar. It coughed. It was a deep, rapid, metallic spasm that sent a tremor through the thin hull. The 37mm shells, specifically the M54HE with tracer rounds, streamed out. They left bright orange trails across the black water. Unlike traditional gun sights, the tracers served as the aiming mechanism itself, a visible line of fire hurtling toward the target. Clang, 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 the shells, designed for aerial combat, tore into the thin aluminum and wood of the barges. The rate of fire, up to 120 rounds per minute, was overwhelming. The first barge dissolved into splinters and steam, followed quickly by the second. The unique sound of the automatic 37mm, sharp and distinct, became the sound of the Marines' survival on the water. It was a testament to the fact that the 37mm, in any configuration, remained a lethal and versatile workhorse. The gun's ubiquity was its strength. It was the main weapon on the new M8 Greyhound armoured car. Though quickly relegated from anti-tank duty to reconnaissance, the M8 still used its 37mm for fire support. It was even mounted on the LVTA-1 amphibious vehicle, providing crucial direct fire during the hazardous beach assaults. The 37mm was the universal caliber of infantry support. Its canister rounds cleared jungle trails, and its HE rounds smashed pillboxes. In the Pacific, the 37mm gun was a dominant force, a technological peak achieved in a specific theatre of war. But while the Marines were successfully adapting aircraft cannons to sink barges, across the globe a different, heavier war was underway. In the vast, dusty expanse of North Africa, the early German Panzer IVs and the first terrifying glimpses of the mighty Tigers were already rendering the 37mm's maximum penetration capabilities tragically obsolete. The curtain was rising on the European theatre. The workhorse was about to meet a foe it could not scratch. The whispers began in North Africa, carried on the searing wind that whipped dust across the Atlas Mountains. They are 2 days earlier from the portability of the towed M3 gun. They were about the size of the enemy. The war in the West was fundamentally different from the war in the Pacific. In the jungle, the 37mm gun was a hammer against glass. In the desert, it was a pea-shooter against granite. German engineers, unconstrained by the limitations of interwar treaties, had relentlessly up-armored their machines. The later models of the Panzer IV rolled into battle with thick, sloped frontal plates. Behind them came the truly terrifying shapes, the Panther and the Tiger. These new adversaries were armoured with steel. The 37mm M51 armour-piercing capped projectile could not hope to defeat. The projectile relied on the precise physics of its chrome steel cap to penetrate 2.4 inches of plate at an optimal angle. Against the hull of a Tiger, it simply shattered or left a harmless metallic scratch. Desperation drove innovation. Engineers scrambled to imbue the aging gun with renewed potency. They resurrected radical, destructive concepts like the squeeze-bore adapter T1, developed in early 1942. This device tapered the end of the gun tube, forcing a specialized copper-bodied projectile to compress its diameter. It shrank from 37mm down to 28mm as it exited the muzzle. The result was a dramatic increase in velocity, a desperate injection of kinetic energy. The velocity was impressive,
but the cost was ruinous. The massive pressure surges caused by the constriction dramatically reduced the gun barrel's lifespan, often damaging the internal flanges.
That made the solution a destructive trade-off that few commanders were willing to accept. Even more exotic were the spigot grenades. Late in the war, the T-21 and T-22 prototypes were tested. These were grotesque, oversized projectiles fitted with shaped charge warheads packed with cyclotolix explosive. They were essentially massive, fine stabilized bombs slipped over the muzzle and spigot fired. They were designed to deliver 10 inches of penetration at 600 yards, a miracle of chemistry over velocity. But these were last-ditch efforts, arriving too late to matter. It was a final, frantic attempt to cheat physics. The verdict on the 37mm gun was delivered not on a shell-scarred ridge, but in the stale air of a U.S. Army ordnance meeting in Sicily in the summer of 1943. The M6 gun motor carriage, the primary self-propelled anti-tank weapon for which thousands of vehicles and crews had been prepared, was standing ready in motor pools. Its M3 gun was mounted on the back of the WC-52 chassis. Specialist Sergeant Victor Vic Morales stood beside his M6 GMC, parked axle-deep in gritty sand near the port. The heat was oppressive, heavy with the smell of unrefined diesel and salt. This three-man crew was polishing the smooth, heavy brass cartridge cases, waiting for the order to move north to the front lines. The M6 was fast, mobile, and low profile. But Vic had heard the rumors filtering back from the few M3 Stuarts that had survived the clashes with the Afrika Korps. The 37mm rounds bounced off the German medium tanks like pebbles. A staff car pulled up, kicking up a plume of orange dust that settled immediately on the hot metal of the M6's gun shield. A lieutenant, grim-faced and holding a sheaf of papers, approached Vic's vehicle. "Sergeant Morales, this vehicle is being reclassified." Vic frowned, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Reclassified, sir? As what?" "We're ready to roll." The guns bore-sighted.
As limited standard, Morales.
"Effective immediately. You are not to proceed to the main European theatre of operations." The lieutenant's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, like a man reading an obituary. "The M6 GMC is deemed incapable of defeating the latest German armor. It's a strategic failure for its intended purpose." The announcement hit with the metallic clang of a dropped shell casing. The gun, the Army's first dedicated anti-tank weapon, the focus of years of development, was obsolete before it had fired a single shot in Europe. Vic looked at the 37mm tube. Its smooth, rifled interior was designed to handle pressures up to 36,000 psi. It was designed to deliver a lethal blow. Now that lethal blow was insufficient.
"What about the crew, sir?"
"Where do we go?" Vic asked, his voice tight.
"The vehicles are to be converted back to standard WC-52 weapons carriers where possible. Your gun will be reassigned to the South Pacific. They still need anti-personnel support there. Or you can volunteer to crew the new 57mm. Zad Morales is the future." The new 57mm gun, heavier and bulkier, was already replacing the M3 on the docks. It was a tangible sign of the technological disparity that had doomed the 37mm. The arms race had accelerated past the capabilities of the small caliber, demanding a massive jump in projectile weight and kinetic energy. The M6 GMC, the pride of the mobile anti-tank effort, never saw combat in Europe. Its failure was a stark statement of strategic policy. The US Army simply could not risk the lives of its tank destroyer crews by sending them into battle with a gun that could not penetrate the enemy's main battle tanks. The 37mm gun, that versatile workhorse which had smashed Japanese bunkers and shot down barges, was formally relegated. It would continue to serve, providing crucial infantry support and anti-personnel fire in the Pacific theatre. But its primary role stopping the juggernaut of German armor was definitively over. The era of the small-caliber anti-tank gun had ended, not with a bang, but with a bureaucratic order classifying it as limited standard. The strategic failure of the 37mm gun in the European theatre was absolute.
But the war was not fought in a single dimension. While the M6 gun motor carriage was being pulled from service in Sicily and relegated to the scrap heap of inadequate technology, the exact same gun system was carving out a brutal, indispensable legacy thousands of miles away.
The Pacific War was defined by island fortresses and jungle warfare. It demanded portability and high explosive power against soft targets, not necessarily deep armor penetration. Could this obsolete weapon find a new life? Here, the 37mm found its true persistent utility. It quickly became the universal caliber of fire support. The gun appeared wherever the front line met the sea, bolted into the thin armor of the LVT-A1 amphibious vehicles. These armored crocodiles carried the Marines directly to shore. It was the only weapon providing direct fire support during the terrifying approach to islands like Tarawa and Peleliu. Sergeant Frank McIntyre gripped the traverse wheel inside the cramped, vibrating turret of his LVT-A1. The engine roared beneath the deck plates, churning the bloody surf into foam. The LVT was pitching violently, the air inside thick with the smell of exhaust and unspent cordite. Ahead, the beach was a wall of coral and smoke, where Japanese bunkers reinforced with concrete and steel spat fire. Mac's gun, the M6 variant, was designed to be operated by a single gunner, but the sheer chaos of the landing demanded absolute focus. The projectile was a 2-pound hammer, and Mac had to choose his tool instantly. "Pillbox dead ahead." "H.E.," Mac yelled over the din. The loader, Private Sanchez, slammed the brass Mark II high-explosive cartridge into the breech. Mac fired. The muzzle flash, briefly visible despite the FNH powder, seemed to suck the air from the small turret. The shell screamed out and detonated against the bunker aperture, resulting in a boom and a crack. A plume of dust and pulverized concrete erupted. Again. Keep it on the slit. For the next 10 minutes, the LVT pumped HE rounds into the position. The hydro-spring recoil system absorbed the massive shock, the metallic vibration running straight through Mac's bones. The 37mm was designed to maintain a flat trajectory, functioning as a precision tool for knocking out fortifications. When the heavy machine gun finally fell silent, Mac shifted his gaze. The immediate threat was now the sudden, desperate charge of Japanese infantry. They emerged from spider holes and drainage ditches, sprinting toward the exposed Marines scrambling ashore. This was the exact moment the 37mm transformed from a precision weapon into a lethal, wide-area tool. Canister. Sanchez instinctively reached for the specialized rounds. The canister shot was nothing more than a giant shotgun shell, packed with hundreds of steel balls. It was explicitly an anti-personnel weapon. Mac swung the turret. He didn't aim. He simply pointed. When the canister round fired, the effect was instantaneous and devastating. Instead of a single sharp crack, there was a heavy, deafening thump. This was followed immediately by the sound of tearing flesh and sand being kicked up in massive, violent swaths. The steel balls scythed through the charging infantry line, clearing a 50-yard arc of the beachhead. The enemy dissolved. The smell of copper and finely atomized steel hung in the air. The 37mm gun, scorned in North Africa, was the absolute master of the Pacific close fight. This versatility defined its entire legacy. The 37mm was not just a ground weapon. It was a foundational system that spanned the entire American arsenal. It was the backbone of the M3 and M5 Stuart light tanks, which, while obsolete against Panthers, remained essential reconnaissance and infantry support vehicles throughout the war. This was especially true in the dense close-quarters fighting in the jungle. It was the primary armament of the P-39 Airacobra and the P-63 King Cobra fighter planes. In these aircraft, the M4, M9, and M10 automatic cannons delivered rapid, solenoid-fired bursts of 37mm HE. Pilots used the nose-mounted gun, firing through the propeller spinner, to engage ground targets and destroy high-altitude bombers. The M10 variant, with its disintegrating link belt feed, symbolized the peak of automatic cannon technology. Its M54 HE rounds incorporated a self-destroying tracer mechanism to prevent accidental casualties miles away. The gun's final definitive role was that of a workhorse. It was a weapon system that, even when outpaced by the technology of the Grossdeutschland, was simply too useful to retire. It was the caliber that equipped every early American armored car, every early light tank, and through the ingenuity of field modification, every PT boat desperate for firepower. The story of the 37mm gun is the story of the relentless iterative nature of military development. It was born from a treaty, rushed into production by observation of the Spanish Civil War, and rendered obsolete by 1943. Yet it never left the fight. Its core technology, the FNH propellant, the APC projectile, the hydro-spring recoil system, established the baseline for all subsequent American artillery. The 37mm gun was not the weapon that won the war, but it was the essential, adaptable tool that kept the US Army and Marine Corps alive long enough for the heavier, more powerful calibers, the 57mm, the 75mm, and the 90mm, to finally arrive. It was the flawed foundation upon which modern American armored warfare was built. If you value these historical accounts, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us preserve these stories. And please, share your own memories or thoughts in the comments below.